1083, and I'm going to walk you through a quick project. This is a project that I recently finished, and the final name is called Mercury in Retrograde. However, when I made this initially, I only titled it as Project 6. So this is the sixth track in the order that I worked them on. So I don't actually come up with the names while I'm making the track, or rather after. So let me play it for you from start to finish real quick, then we'll go ahead and go over it. So here it is. Alright, now if you can hear that sounds out of tune, that's because I am using these analog synthesizers as a emulation of hardware, and so these go out of tune as an emulation. Go ahead and tune this up. Alright, that sounds a lot better. Alright, so that was the track. It's about 1 minute 36 seconds long. Not very long by any measure. It's a rather short track, but I didn't want this to get too repetitive, so let's go over some of the facets of this track real quick, starting from the first instrument. Now, this is the first instrument I made when I did this track. I made this using the on-screen keyboard or my computer keys. And I came up with this kind of simple riff, and I'm going to play it for you again. And this is how it goes. So nothing too extraordinary. We let this repeat again, and then we throw in these snare drums. You'll see these come in right here. This starts us off. There's the synthesizer that was out of tune, but it's now in tune. Okay, so let me first explain to you that after we've gone over this first track, I'm going to go down to the second track here. What's interesting about this second track is the MIDI data. It is the exact same track. There's no difference between the first track and the second track. However, the sound is different. So we're going to be covering some basic rules in music theory in this video, and one of the things that I want to share with you is not to be too off the rails and get crazy with your music. Now that can be good, but you want to stay limited, at least in scope, for a while before you really broaden your horizons. If you do that, you can kind of get a good um, sounding mix, if you start changing it too much, it sounds randomized. You don't want to do that. So there does have to be some repetition of maybe 2 bars or 4 bars. But then what you want to do is um, change it. But before you change it, you probably want to repeat yourself with maybe a different sound. Now that's what we've done here with these 2 tracks. We bring it in, um, these first 8 bars, we bring this in, and we drop it off when the snares and the kick drum come in. So I just want you guys to look at this real quick. So we drop the sound off, and then it comes back, but it comes back in on the second track with a different sound. And you'll hear this here in a second. So you see it's not there. Then all of a sudden, so let's call that a basic rule of music theory number 1. And we'll skip ahead and say that this is rule number 2, that when you make these tracks, you want to have a good understanding of questions and answers. That if you see that this is the synthesizer that I brought into question at the very beginning, that this portion right here would be the question, and this portion at the other end of the bar or region would be the answer. And so what I mean by that is that a good sounding mix will answer these questions. I'll just solo these 2 tracks. Now these 2 tracks are actually both the same synthesizer and sound, but I have the second one transposed by 12 semitones here, so gives it some good bottom end. But let's play back what I mean real quick. So here's the question, and the question again, and now we're going to answer it. So that was the answer right there. Now, a personal take of mine is you don't want to come up with too many answers, or it'll sound maybe trite or banal. And so it's good to introduce, some of these questions and keep your listener pining for, these answers that are eventually going to come up. And you'll notice that this is the only time in the song that I use those 2 regions. They don't come back. You do have to repeat the song if you want to hear them again. So this is probably a pretty simple track, really. Nothing real crazy here. These tracks down here, some of them are drums, but not all of them are drums. This is kind of like a supporting synth. Go on and look at this third synthesizer here. So that's a pretty good mellow sound. We take it in, and we add this back in. So you kind of get an idea of what I'm doing here. Now we do have chords coming up. This next synth has power chords. I am going to show you the actual instrument itself here in a second, but let's just go into this real quick. Here's a bridge coming up. And then this kind of takes us into our mix. Now you see I've automated that in order to bring the volume up and then down. And then this comes back in the way you'd expect with hi-hats. Here's the hi-hat section. And then we end here with these regions. I'll get into that next. So that ending sound is these regions here. I do want to take a brief moment to look at this with you to show you how I did that. Now if you'll see this here, you'll notice that's actually audio, that's not MIDI data. And I bounced this with Portamento or Glide On. I'm going to show you what that is. So those regions I bounced came from this track that's muted. We've muted it here because we're not using it. I'm going to show you the automation real quick. So if you look here, you see I have this note data, and this is, I guess, this is a high D, and it goes down to a lower, what is this? A lower G. And the reason I do that is to activate the portamento. So this note plays silently here. You see the automation 0, and then coming up here to this G, it's minus 12 decibels. Now the reason I did that was because I want to activate the portamento, and so this is probably a good time to get into basic synthesis real quick. So here is the portamento in action. So the volume, this is actually muted, so let's go ahead and solo that. So I went from a high D, what was this? So that was probably about what I did, was a high D here. Actually, I can't even see the keyboard. But you can hear the glide at the beginning of the note is just like what violinists do when they slide their hand, or what guitarists do when they do the same thing. Is that is actually called portamento or glide. I'm going to turn this down so you can hear it with it off. So it is off there, but when we turn it on, you'll hear this glide. The glide is more prevalent when we go up octaves, so because I'm using my keyboard, I've got to manually shift using these keys here. But if we go, so I just played a really high note, and if we go back down these octaves, you'll see there. Now we're going to play a low note. You'll hear the glide really kick in now, because the synthesizer is going to go all the way down the frequency band to come down to these low notes. So what we're going to do is play G. It's probably too low, so let's do that again. Let's come up here and then come down. So that's your basic look at portamento. It's a good effect. Everybody likes that. In fact, I think a lot of early dance music was made doing simple things between 2 octaves with portamento, similar to what I did. I don't think I have the keyboard space to do this, but you see how portamento can kind of add, a good effect. Let's turn it all the way up. Now, the closer your notes are together, the less of an effect that has. That's kind of why I did some of these broad sweeps there, is to show you that. And the reason why I bounced this as audio is I went ahead and I right-clicked this. I said bounce in place and turn it into audio, because I didn't want to have to re-trigger this note here. This note plays silently only to activate the portamento. We don't actually hear that region of the sound. This is, for all intents and purposes, muted. It's just that region that's muted, but you have to do that in order to activate the sound. So let's see, low battery warning there. This is apparently taking up a lot of power, so let's try to get through this. Moving on, I do want to get into compression just a little bit. I don't use a lot of the compressor. So here's the compressor. You can see it's activating. This is not actually the gain reduction meter, this is an output meter. I think they should have added gain reduction, but it's not here for some reason. And I think you need to kind of gauge it by this kind of lamp that's turning on here. But I really don't like to turn the sensitivity or the compression up real high on digital compressors because they start to sound a little weird to me. Now, when you do it on an analog compressor, it's totally different. That they actually sound better as you do that, but this is not quite the same thing. I'm going to turn this up just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. Kind of hear it sounds kind of popping. That's why I don't like to kind of turn these on real high. That's really not a good sound. Now, if you did this with an analog rack-mounted unit, like in a big studio, or it's your project studio, you could turn these up higher and they would sound very good. But for these plugins, I like to kind of keep them low. You get a little bit of compression. I think that's fair for these digital units, is not to push them too hard. I don't think they're meant for that. Well, you can do that if you want to. So we're turning these knobs up. See how it kind of pops like that? I really am not a big fan of that on digital compressors. They all seem to do that, whereas the analog compressors don't do that. And this is a good time to segue into analog versus digital equipment. So these plugins I'm using, this is all Prophet 5 across the board. Even the drums here is Prophet. These aren't even real drums. So I do have a little echo on a lot of these tracks. I think that kind of adds some space into the mix. But we can turn the echo off. You can hear that sounds like. And going over to compression again, we can take this compressor off. You can hear what the kick drum sounds like without the compressor. Now I have turned the output volume down quite a bit, so it's not a fair comparison, but you do kind of get the idea. Anyways, back into analog versus digital. All these plugins are representative of the Prophet 5 made by a guy named Dave Smith. However, these are made by Arturia as the digital plug-in version, and they emulate the hardware. And these have really gotten a lot better throughout the past 10 or 15 years. I mean, I think over a decade and a half ago, they were nowhere near as good as they are now. So comparing that to hardware compressors, I think that digital plugins, as far as compressors and limiters, really aren't there yet. They may one day. I never thought it'd be possible that these digital synthesizers would sound as good as they are in terms of their analog counterparts. This is so lifelike and real compared to the physical unit that it's really astonishing. So getting into this, that these oscillators are modeled after voltage-controlled oscillators, VCOs, and VCAs, voltage-controlled amplifiers, and VCS, voltage-controlled filters. So that's kind of the big mystery takeaway of these analog units, is they work on voltages, compressors and limiters, all the rack units. You've got cables. If you play electric guitar, you know that your electric guitar works with voltages, and that's very good because it gives you a nice, smooth, buttery sound. And digital equipment's still got a long way to go to catch up to that, and it may never get there just because of the nature of computer code and binary versus actually using electricity. So I'm running out of power here. I'm going to go ahead and wind this down. But finishing off, I will kind of get into these controls that you basically have an oscillator that's run through a filter. If you open the filter up, this may not be a good example. Actually, I think that's the wrong instrument. That is the wrong instrument. That is the kick drum. So if you open the filter up, you can see how this kind of sculpts the sound. And these get transferred into an ADSR, envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release. We'll play with these real quick so you can get an idea of these. See how I'm moving the cutoff filter up and down manually? Well, the ADSR does that same thing. However, it does it through the envelope generator. So if we open the attack up, you can hear how that filter comes in very slowly, closing the attack off. And then we're back where we set it. Then the next phase is decay, and your decay directly corresponds to your sustain. Let's bring the sustain down low. You can hear how this kind of ends the sound. And then decay. If we open that back up, you can hear it kind of coming down to the low sustain we set. And closing this decay off, you get more of like a bass line if we lower our octaves. We have to actually see this filter here. We actually have to shut the cutoff down because the envelope amount is applied to the cutoff, so this will be a better example. Alright, so you kind of get like a basic idea there. And then the last control is the release. The release actually is better explained on the amplifier. The amplifier ADSR works exactly the same as the filter ADSR, but see this envelope amount here. It's not applied to the cutoff filter. The amplifier, like these controls here, it's applied directly to the volume. We can find the volume, it's right here. So the amplifier controls here, ADSR, they correspond directly to the volume knob. Now, the release is what happens when you let go of the key. So if we hit this key, we let go, you can kind of hear that. Now I've let go of the key. Maybe you can see this here. You let go of the key, and the sound is still playing. This corresponds with the filters. If you still have your decay set open, this will continue to play out as the release on the amplifier is struck. See, I've let go of the key and it's still playing, but if we take the release down, you can see how this shortens it off there. So that concludes the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, my name was 1083. I want to thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.